Okay, so it's 4:15, so welcome back from your break, everybody. This is our last session for today before we do our close and thanks. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction to the members of the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee, who are going to be talking to us about collaborative cataloging ethics. Take it away, folks.
All right, so I'm going to open up here. I want to thank everybody for coming to our session and giving us an opportunity to share about this code of ethics. And I'm really pleased to be with my fellow ethics steering committee members here. Not all 6 of us could be here today, but there's 4 representing our professional associations from the UK, US, and Canada. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for coming. And then I'm going to go and cover what we're going to talk about today. So next slide, please. All right, so our agenda, we have roughly 6 parts. Some of them are a little shorter than others. I will be giving a little bit of an overview of the code, and Karen will be speaking to some background on creation. Then we're going to cover the talk about the cataloging ethics and considerations around collection management. Then we will talk about what the cataloging ecosystem looks like. And then we will review with you about applying the 10 statements of ethical principles. And then we will move into breakout room discussions to process what we're presenting today, followed with the Q&A. And so with the next slide here, I just want to put in the chat, if you haven't already seen the code, you can access it through this link that I put in the chat here. This is actually the home page for the work that our steering committee has done. We've put the link to the code right front and center, but the rest of the site also gives context about why our group existed, our mission, and all the work leading up to the development of the code. And with the next slide, in terms of the development of the code, I gave hints of this when at the very introduction, beginning of the introduction. So we have 6 members on the steering committee, representatives from ALA through service to the, at the time, catalog and metadata management section, which has become core now. We have members from CILIP serving through the cataloging indexing group, now known as the metadata and discovery group. And then I am affiliated with the Canadian Federated Library Associations and FCAB, which is our Francophone initials for that organization. And I'm liaising with the Cataloging and Metadata Standards Committee. So these 3 professional associations basically like sponsored the development of this code through their subcommittees. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline. I'm going to also, Karen's also going to speak to a little bit about the vision, or original vision. So back in 2017, 2018, that's like, wow, like 5-6 years ago now, at ALA Annual, there was a need expressed for developing a cataloging code of ethics. And then a couple of years later, the steering committee was formed for representatives of the 3 national professional associations. I think roughly about 6 months into our work, we facilitated the formation of working groups to inform on the process of what we should cover in our code. And so these 6 working groups were given 6 topics that are areas that are known to press into cataloging ethics. And these working groups completed reports from which the steering committee drew on to produce a draft of the code. And the draft went through 2 rounds and went through 2 rounds of public consultations. And so somewhere in between was the pandemic, which threw us off our timeline a little bit. But eventually in early 2021, January, I believe, the, I say quotations, a final version was released because we do intend for this to be an organic living document. And it's sometime later in 2021, ALA endorsed it, recommended by CORE. And then in 2022, just last year, CILP endorsed it, recommended by the MDG. And in terms of Canada, we've taken a slightly different and longer engagement approach for endorsement. So we are actively doing that right now. So I'm going to turn over this time to Karen to talk more about the original vision for why the code was created.
Okay, thank you, May. All right, so as May was saying, you know, about the timeline, right, kind of the initial ideas behind the conception of this. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what inspired its creation and how it kind of came to be, right? Because as you saw, it was kind of a lengthy process to get to where we are. But there was certainly a lot of discussion happening, you know, kind of, especially when Beth Shoemaker published an article in 2015, I believe, calling for a cataloging code of ethics. And Beth Shoemaker, by the way, is the co-chair of the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee with me, because we didn't really have an endorsed cataloging code of ethics at this point. That's not to say that there was no ethical guidance at all, right? The various you know, National Library Professional Associations like ALA and CILP also, they have their own codes of ethics, kind of more general for librarians and librarianship. But there was nothing specific for cataloging. So at this particular session in 2017 at the American Library Association's annual conference, at this session, Power That Is Moral, Cataloging and Ethics, Beth presented with Hope Olson. And for those who don't know, she's very influential person within the cataloging world, wrote the book, the influential book called The Power to Name. And we could tell right from the direction of the conversation that there was a lot of desire expressed that we have a code of ethics, just because due to this growing critical cataloging movement, many people in the profession recognized that we needed more guidance, right? Like the ALA, the CILP codes of ethics were just not enough. We needed more guidance for catalogers because we recognized that there were this, you know, lots of our standards and systems and so forth were codified with oppression. There's harm, right, that is associated with cataloging standards and our practices that we really needed to address as a profession. So with that said, further conversation was had, right, because within ALA in particular, within ELEX specifically at the time, we realized we needed to do something, right? So we needed to get together to talk about this at this next forum and the midwinter meeting in 2018, early 2018. There was a further discussion about, you know, just kind of discussing ideas for how we're going to do this, how we're going to create the code, concerns about the process, and so forth. But it was very clear from the audience that there needed to be openness and transparency in the process. That was essential. This cannot be something that is created by those higher up in one organization and then just kind of handed down to everyone else without community consultation. That was made abundantly clear. And so as May was talking about with our process, that was just kind of built into our thinking about this process from the get-go, that we wanted to have community input in multiple ways through working groups, through input like through the Google Docs and so forth in various drafts. And that is what we ended up doing with those things. So we got a lot of great community feedback throughout the entire process. And throughout the entire process, we also tried to identify very specific principles and values in cataloging work that we wanted to kind of inspire this document, right? And as you can see here, looking at these these 10, which kind of came out of our research through the literature, through our discussions with the cataloging community, that there is some overlap, right, between kind of more general cataloging codes and what we have here, but it's not exact, right? There are certain aspects of this that clearly apply specifically to cataloging, but we wanted to make sure and kind of identifying these principles and values that they are included in the statements of cataloging principle, because these were identified as very important cataloging ethical issues that we needed to address, right? So therefore, just to kind of sum up in terms of why we need this, right, as we've already kind of alluded to, the kind of more general LIS professional codes of ethics are important, right? But this cataloging code of ethics is not meant to like take its place, right? It's not meant to just completely override those other documents. Instead, we wanted them to complement. We wanted this document to complement the existing code of ethics, but be kind of more geared towards catalogers' work in particular, because we wanted to recognize these special responsibilities of catalogers, right? There's certain work that we do that's a little different, right, than other areas of the profession. So we wanted to recognize this and clearly spell it out, right, and emphasize that in the document. In addition, one thing that we found throughout this process is this need for agency and empowerment in having this document, because not everyone in various institutions and organizations have the ability to inspire and make the change that they want. Okay, so we were hoping that this document can provide, you know, power, right, empowerment to catalogers and agency, and perhaps, talking to their supervisors, their administrators. Look, this is an issue that I feel very strongly about. This is something that is an ethical issue that we need to address. And here is this, endorsed cataloging code of ethics that kind of provides guidance on this front on what we should do, what we should be doing. Okay, we can't necessarily do all the things, but we should be trying, and here's documented evidence for that with this document. So we're hoping that this can be something that you can use in your work for agency empowerment as well. And also, we wanted to make sure catalogers have, they have a seat. They need to have a seat at the table in like DEI and social justice conversations that are happening in libraries and all over the world, right? This is something that that many libraries are doing. And so we wanted, with this document to make it clear that catalogers do have a stake in this, that our work has a stake in this and is an important part of DEI conversations about, DEI, social justice and colonization. So so we're hoping, that you can use this document as well to help support those efforts at your institution. So now in terms of the actual statements, right, we've been kind of talking around them. We're going to start getting into that in just a moment. But here is kind of the basic breakdown and organization of the Cataloging Code of Ethics. It's a short open access document, and it's not, we try to keep it fairly short and sweet, used to review cataloging policy and practice through an ethical lens. So it's not like a step-by-step checklist that says, okay, have you done this? Have you done this? Okay, great. You're now officially an ethical cataloger. That is not the point of what we're doing. We wanted this to be a framework, if you will, to look at your work through an ethical lens and help you think through what you're doing in a way that we can be more ethical about our work. So we have an introduction in part 1 that explains kind of the background to our works and definitions of words that we use and the scope of the document. And then part 2 starts the 10 statements of ethical principles, but like I said, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. But I am now going to hand things over to Jane, who needs to unmute. Sorry, Jane. Okay.
It sets. Right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting us. We really appreciate this opportunity. Just to very quickly take a few sentences that we've lifted actually from the code itself. We felt it was really important to talk about the intended audience. We've tried to frame this presentation very much in terms of catalogers and metadata managers, but also catalogers and metadata managers working with yourselves on collection management issues. So you may be a subject librarian or another member of the technical services team, but we hope that everyone will embrace the code and understand what it is we're trying to do with it. So this ethics document provides a framework for approaching cataloging work that will be a useful tool for practitioners, employers, standards developers, vendors, students, and educators when ethical situations arise. So what we're talking about here is catalogers and metadata managers who may work across the cultural and heritage sector. So they could be working in archives and museums just as equally in libraries. But also we're acknowledging that actually the whole cataloging ecosystem actually comprises people who work in many different spheres of activity. So there will be practitioners, there will be the employers of those practitioners, there will be colleagues who work with the standards developers at local, national and international levels. There will be the vendors that we may purchase systems, resources and metadata from. There will be students, amongst them Karen's, for instance. Karen teaches library and information studies. So she'll be embedding ethical cataloging in her teaching with her students, the catalogers and hopefully metadata managers of the not too distant future. So a whole gamut of people that should have an interest in ethical cataloging. The second sentence we've lifted here, we accept that every workplace is different and responses to ethical situations are necessarily framed by those local contexts. So just picking up on a point we made earlier, we're going to look at the 10 ethical statements, but they're not intended as a tick list, okay? What we're saying in this sentence is that where you work and what your job comprises is going to maybe make some of the ethical principles seem a lot more relevant to what you do on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, that's where you'll see your agency and empowerment, hopefully. Next slide, please, Karen. And just to put this firmly within the context of collection management. So just to reinforce this, I will keep telling you how important catalogers and metadata managers are, and I'm not going to apologize for doing that either. So catalogers play an essential role in creating, managing, enriching, repairing, sharing, and preserving metadata so that collections can be searched, discovered, and accessed, not just now, but in the future. And the cataloging ecosystem is complex and challenging, but it's also rich in opportunities. So if we go on to the next slide, this is a brilliant diagram that Karen actually created for us so that we could sort of put in a graphic visual image the spheres of activity and hopefully influence that catalogers and metadata managers inhabit. So basically it's 5 nested circles. We're going to start with the cataloger and the impact of their moral compass and their own lived experiences on the way that they work and what they're able to bring to that. But of course, no cataloger is an island. What you do or what your cataloger or metadata manager can do is very much framed within the context of their the institution in which they work. So the policies, the culture, the resources that are available to do the work, all of that comes into play. The third circle looks at the user community and is all about enabling, reacting to the needs of your user community. Do you know them? Do they have any particular preferences or requirements in terms of the resources that they need? Are there language issues that need to be taken into account? How about general accessibility? So if you're buying resources for a particular user community, are you sure that they're able to find them and actually access them and use them? And then the wider full circle, the community of practice. So we've acknowledged that our standards are developed at national, international levels. It's a very dynamic environment. The cataloger has to be aware of the standards and the way that they evolve and change. And also we have to think about the authority implied by those standards, but also accept that the people creating those standards are people. They're going to have their own experiences and biases possibly that they bring to the work. And so it's we all need to be looking out for this and making sure that the standards are actually fit for purpose. And then the final circle, and possibly one that hoves into view a lot more these days, is we cannot ignore the external influences. So this is the people that we maybe do business with, the commercial entities that we may partner with for things like our systems, where we purchase or license resources from, who we agree with to provide metadata, and the culture and laws that affect the way that they work. So quite a lot to be taken in there. And a lot of what we do when we negotiate these circles is actually done quite subconsciously, because we know they're there, but we won't be sort of ticking these off on a day-to-day basis. We'll be thinking about them as they apply to the task in hand. Okay, next slide, please, Karen. So what we're going to do now is go through the ethical principles with you. And what we've done is we've put them into 3 sort of thematic groups to make it a little bit easier to think about them. And the first group is tasks, audiences, and hurdles. So principle number 1, we catalogue with the end user in mind to facilitate access and promote discovery. Principle 2, we commit to describing resources without discrimination whilst respecting the privacy and preferences of agents. Principle 3, we acknowledge that we bring our biases to the workplace. We strive to overcome personal, institutional, and societal prejudices in our work. And principle 10, we work with our user communities to provide relevant and timely services. Now, these are high-level statements, as you can see. So now we need to think about, well, how are we going to actually apply these in practice? So if we go on to the next slide, please, Karen. Probably the easiest way to think about it is just ask yourself some questions based on those statements. So in relation to your user communities, do you know who they are? Do you have that kind of detailed information? What kind of tools do you have at your disposal to be able to profile them? What resources do they need or prefer? Are there specific formats? Are there languages? Are there genres? How will you obtain these resources, and who will provide the metadata to ensure discovery? So is this going to be your cataloger and metadata team, if you're lucky enough to have more than one person doing that work? Are they going to be creating this metadata, or are you going to be partnering with someone? And if so, how are you going to make sure that the metadata is appropriate and to standard and will do the job that you require? And finally, is the language used in catalogs, discovery layers, aggregators, databases fit for purpose? So is the quality there? Is it complete? Is it inclusive? So at this point now, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to finish off the presentation for us.
Yes, so Jane did a fantastic job of starting us off with our kind of focus, right? And the some other approaches to our work, right? Talking about collaboration. Principle 7, we collaborate widely to support the creation, distribution, maintenance, and enrichment of metadata. Principle 4, we recognize that all these standards are biased, as both Karen and Jane and May have mentioned, right? We're created by people, nothing is perfect. And we are going to give ourselves the ability to approach them critically and to advocate to make our standards, whether it's at a local level or at a higher, more broad level, more inclusive. And principle 5, we support efforts to make standards and tools financially, intellectually, and technologically accessible. If you would please, Karen, go to the next slide. These are a couple of practical questions that you can kind of approach these principles with, right? So thinking about local, regional, national, international, or even subject specific partnerships, thinking about our common goals, right? DEI, decolonization. And Jane was our champion, keeping us on track, thinking about other non-metadata or non-library providers of metadata, constantly reminding us that, and it's really easy when you're kind of in the trenches and in the work to think, well, only librarians do this, but that's not true, right? So talk to your suppliers, talk to your vendors, your any kind of business partner that you have, and have that conversation, right? What can we do better, not only in our institution, but with our other partners? Next slide, please. And in addition to that, how do we continue to get better? We do that through ourselves, right? We want to, Principle 8, we insist on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And with that comes promoting education, training, equitable pay, and fair work environment for everyone who catalogs, not just librarians, not just, tenure track professors, right? Everybody who is touching this metadata should be treated equally, right? We take responsibility for our cataloging decisions and advocate for transparency. And Principle 9, we advocate for the value of cataloging work within our organizations and with external partners. Next slide, please. So with that, what support to access cataloging and metadata management education and professional development is available, not only for people of a certain level, but everybody in your department? Do your sectoral strategic bodies realize the need for a skilled and sustainable cataloging and metadata management workforce? I work in public libraries, so this is something that I'm constantly advocating for with my department. It's really easy for, especially in public libraries, if you're not interacting with patrons, it's really easy for the work that you're doing that definitely, contributes to and drives DEI initiatives to get forgotten or swept under the rug or not included. So when Karen said making sure you have a seat at the table, that is so important. Just because I'm not speaking directly to a patron or working a desk doesn't mean what I'm doing every day isn't a public service, right? And does your collection management team include a cataloger or metadata manager? When you are managing your collection, you're not only managing the physical item, you're managing all of the metadata that has gone into cataloging that thing, right? So making sure that everyone kind of is included. So it was kind of an interesting way to kind of break up our principles, right? They're numbered, but they're not in any particular order. And we kind of broke them up thematically. So Karen, if you want to go to the next slide, we're going to do some breakout rooms and discuss the principles, but we also have some discussion questions. So what ethical issues have you encountered in your work? Have you resolved the issues? And if so, how? And what issues remain unsolved? May also put those in the chat. So Karen, do you want to break out the breakouts?
I will break out the breakouts. Okay, so I've been working on it since everyone else has been talking, and I've put one cataloging ethics steering committee member per room. There are 4 rooms.
Okay.
And I, for some reason, as a co-host, I'm not able to add myself to a room, so I'll just try to just jump into a room whenever I can. But yeah, so with these, I mean, like I said, the cataloging ethics steering committee member will be there to help kind of, perhaps stimulate discussion. But otherwise, we want you all to hopefully to have a great conversation about these questions and anything that's on your mind. So I'm going to go ahead and open up all the rooms and let us know if there's any issue with this. Okay, so and we'll have, what do we decide 15 minutes? Is that team about 15 minutes? Is that what we decided? I'm forgetting. Okay, all right, that's what I posted. I made it 15 minutes and you'll get an alert once that time is almost up. So, okay. Everybody, off you go. I'm sharing that. Okay. I just want to make sure everybody gets in before I enter a room. Nobody's having any issues.
Just to let you know, me, Michelle, I won't go anywhere because I'm the host. So
okay. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Still some people. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, if there's any issues, Michelle, if there's anyone who's behind that needs some help, then just let me know when I can come back in if need be.
will do. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank my group for their contributions. Didn't have a chance to do that.
Oh yeah, same. Thank you. So how do we want to I mean, I don't know if we want to have like a report out, or if there's just anything in particular that kind of came up in your groups that you want to kind of bring to the larger group for discussion. I mean, I know that we weren't able to kind of answer all of the questions or even have too many resolutions to what the issues were, but it was still a really great discussion. And what about everybody else?
We had a good mix of people in our group. We have people who are doing cataloging or who had completed a cataloging kind of practicum, doing even a dissertation on subject language. We had a couple of managers in our group and a selector, so we had a varied group, and yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we had a pretty varied group as well. So anything like Jane in your group, was there like a particular thread that you all kind of focused on, or what?
Yes, there was. Actually, what I'd like to do is ask Karen if she'd like to explain it again. Are you still with us, Karen?
Oh, not me. Oh, other.
No.
Okay.
No, Karen Pierce. Sorry, I should have made that clear.
So the issue I raised was, this happened a number of years ago. A book came into, I'm a cataloger, a book came in, and from the authority record, the name authority, I could see that the person had changed gender, so they had a new name and obviously weren't using their dead name anymore. But as cataloging rules, you transcribe what you see on the book, and the dead name, was on the book. So we would talk about, well, what do? Do you transcribe what you see, which is a cataloging rule, or are you putting their new name on? But then that might prevent users from finding the book if it's on their reading list with the dead name. We didn't really come up with a solution, but it was quite difficult from many angles, I think.
I wonder though, I mean, because we also had, we talked about that a little bit in my group as well, not with that, but just kind of having information in like an authority record, or that even the bibliographic record that really doesn't reflect the person, and it's just information that they may not want to have out there. But I'm just wondering how many people have systems that they use that maybe if someone types in someone's dead name into the system, it kind of redirects them to their name that they're using now, without the dead name being actually recorded for the users to see, right? Does anyone have any systems like that? Because I know that there are some systems that do that for subject headings as well, where you can kind of type in various subject headings, but then they don't actually appear to the user in the record, but it just, so you don't have those headings that are offensive clearly in the record. I don't know how common that is.
Yeah, that actually came up in our group because there was a question in our group, like a practical question, like what do we do with the metadata that comes in, say, through vendors, and the terms are not great, and some of us just manually delete them, making sure that there's other terms to use, and then for sort of more batch processes, say at the University of Toronto, with regard to the heading Indians of North America, Indians of South America, we do use Primo. There is a layer in metadata sort of configuration within Primo to mask the heading and replace it with something else. But we have not extended this to names. But it's possible, because you can do it with subject headings. It's just that names there's so many of them. We haven't figured out a workflow yet.
Because that was another thing that came up actually, May, in my group almost immediately, is this workload, right? That right, if we want to do the right thing, we want to catalog ethically, do we have the workforce, right? And also equitable labor to do this, and right, how can we advocate for that at our institution? I don't know if that came up elsewhere, but yeah.
And that came up in our group as well. One of our group members is a manager, And in that particular institution, there's a perception that it's that cataloging is a time sink. And I guess there seems to be a trend to like reduce staff and deploy those resources elsewhere. And I don't have an easy solution for this, but I was hoping that our code could be used in, strategic conversations around, if institutions are wanting to do better with EDI and be meaningful and sincere about those efforts, then, like having the code as a way to give voice to some of our advocacy would take away the personal individual. It's like, this is actually a systemic thing. It's not just one person, saying I need this because it's my department or something. So
that came up in our group too. We talked a lot about the resources of very small departments and how whether or not it is balancing pros and cons with retroactive or retrospective recataloging, or just moving forward when you don't have the staff. And yes, we'd love to have a completely ethical, wonderful catalog, but maybe we can't go back for whatever reason. Maybe our ILS is outdated and it takes way too long to do anything. Maybe we are one person or we have one cataloger, and maybe instead it would be better to start with forward facing, moving on from make a policy decision regarding dead names, right, and just go forward with that. And if someday in the future we have more resources and we can do a retrospective project, that's great. But for now, using what we have and advocating for more in the future, using, as May said, kind of a code to take it to bring it more of a systemic application rather than maybe negative connotation of whiny tech services department.
And there's a couple of comments in the chat in response. Harriet says, I suppose the issue is that even if you can redirect in the name authority in the statement of responsibility in 245, you would still be expected to record what's on the book, regardless if it's a dead name. And I think that's probably what a lot of institutions are doing. Free text what's on the book, what you see is what you get, and use the authority, updated authority, as a way to capture the updated name. And then George wrote, I know there has been work within journal publishing to retroactively update someone's publishing record to include their new name, which is helpful, but I'd be interested how that has been done on a practical level. I'm sure artifacts remain. I know a trans author who had to fight hard to get her name changed on her previous books. She managed it, but again, that changes the record of her publishing history. There must be ways to resolve it, given this will only become more common as people take advantage of the ability to retroactively change names. So this is a live thing that we're grappling with.
Yeah, and so this idea of, also like it was mentioned before, kind of having personal information that you may not want, like authors may not want to share in the record. One of our team members mentioned perhaps the ability to kind of opt in, just kind of make the assumption, like to not include information, like race, ethnicity, gender orientation, identity, and so forth in there, and then have an opt-in essentially for authors say, yes, you can use this information about me in like an authority record or and so forth. And I do think that to a certain extent we do that, right? If there is information in the authority record and the author requests it removed, then I think that Library of Congress authority record will honor that, but there's not really a good systematic way, right, that authors can do that, to my knowledge. So but I also wanted to come back to what something that kind of crossed my mind with what Sarah was saying, is that when you are in a situation where you just don't have the resources, the staff, the time to do all the things, right? I think that looking at this document, the Code of Ethics, and seeing just this, once again, even though it's not a checklist, right, it's still a pretty decently long list of things that we want you all to consider. It seems really overwhelming. Like, what I just can't do all these things. I think maybe just kind of deciding, once again, kind of more systematically, like what can we tackle in what time frame, right? Kind of looking at it, you know, in a more practical standpoint of just kind of like, we can't do all the things, but what can make a difference now, perhaps, even if it's something small, right? I don't know what you all think about that. Like what would be a small thing that you could do to start making your cataloging more ethical at your institution? Yeah, Darren.
Yeah, I think I think in terms of how I think we can make it more ethical in our institution, I think I put it into the chat, is just to talk more with our cataloging staff just about what we are trying to, because I think at the moment they are trying to do their best, but they're not necessarily getting much of a steer, and there's a big issue with it being almost invisible work that goes on in the background, and that lack of visibility of what the work is and what it entails means that it is devalued. And there's also, in most institutions I've worked in, there's a big gendered element to that as well, in terms of what recognition people achieve and what notice they get for their work. But actually just being able to communicate more with them and about saying, you know, well, this is the things that we think in the context of our institution are the most important things we need to address. And actually, rather than saying we need to fix the entire catalogue, we can look at more achievable parts of it that are going to have the biggest positive impact on our community that we're working with, maybe.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Just to add to that, really, I think some of the issues that maybe have been highlighted in the groups will cut across many different institutions. So if you're in a local or a regional or a sectoral group already, might it be possible to raise that? Because it could be that other organizations or institutions will be in a similar situation. And, you know, many hands make light work. We were talking in our group about the need to maybe create a position paper, highlight the key agents that are going to help you to achieve the goal that you want, and then working with them. So it could be, for instance, that you've identified issues with the metadata coming from a particular vendor, and you need to talk to them about that, explain why it may not be suitable for you and your institution and your users, and kick the discussion off that way. We can do the same within libraries. We have regional metadata and cataloging groups in the UK. I'm sure you have similar in across the world, actually. So maybe it's a case of just reaching out to other institutions and then being able to work collaboratively to achieve that goal.
Thank you, Jane. I have that we have like what, 2 minutes left in the session. So if there's, right, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we.
So if anyone does have any last questions, we've probably got time for another one. Any other comments or questions before we finish? Do feel free to pop your hand up or pop something into the chat and I'll read it out.
Yes.
I may also ask it in the chat. I'm just wondering, is there currently anything in place to say people who've changed their name out of like safety concerns? What would happen to them? Would they just not be able to partake in academic work in that way then? Because, for example, Siobhan is not my legal name whatsoever. It hasn't been for a while, but that is why I don't use my own name. So say if I would have been a lot older, because I'm still quite young, would there just have been no way for me to work around that? Would anything that I did in the past just go into the void currently?
Okay, so if there is there any other last questions? Oh, I think we've just come up on 1:15, so I think we'll wrap it up there. But thank you all so much for that session. It's been really interesting, and I think, as somebody said in the chat, as a non-cataloger, it's really interesting to get that perspective and to see how these things link up. So I really appreciate that. If we could all express our thanks in the chat as well, to the group. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to invite you all to stick around for a few more minutes as an entirety of people, and I'm just going to switch over to some final slides just to say our goodbyes.
While you do that, Darren, I will show people our wonderful, well, some of our wonderful merch. So this is our postcard, and this is our sticker. And Darren, I don't know if you've ordered the loop socket, the other things, but if you would like a postcard, sticker, or a pop socket / loop socket, or all three, or one or two, and you haven't yet filled in our form to say so, please do fill it in. I've just shared that link in the chat. Darren, you're muted. Starting it and ended the
I know. I saw. As soon as I started speaking, I thought I'm muted. I know I'm muted, and I couldn't find my button. Okay. Well, you've covered my first bullet point now. So thank you for that. So yeah, conference swag. I've also put onto the form where you can express whether you want any conference swag. I've also put on an option to put on a welcome message for tomorrow. So if you have anything that you want to share with the rest of our attendees tomorrow in our conference welcome, there is a field where you can put in a little message to say to everybody. There is also a space that you can put in messages of thanks. So if you've got a message that you want displayed for any of our speakers from today, you can put in your message there, and again, we'll display those. I myself want to say thank you to all of our speakers today, because they've done such an incredible job, and they've been really, really great to work with in terms of putting this together. And then just a final reminder just about the Zoom details for tomorrow. They've all gone out into the email to everybody. It's the same setup tomorrow, but it was a different link for the Zoom room. The passcode is the same, so you can use that one. Anyone that's had any problems with that, or if you've not received that, you can contact us on calcconference@gmail.com and we'll get those to you. We start tomorrow morning, registration from 9:45 till 10. We won't be actually starting anything until 10 o'clock, but you are more than welcome to come into those first 15 minutes so that you can get yourself settled before we start. I think, Michelle, is that everything? Have I covered everything we need?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. There's a few things that have also gone up today on the conference site. So I took some those links from Naomi's talk earlier, so that if you want to check up any of those, there's also the keynote text and the slides from Gurnham's keynote today. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much. Bye.